Well,
Which is
why are
what
you
interests
proud
us.
of this film?
Because it upsets people.
Here Danny Boyle was talking about Trainspotting, a mid-budget, messy, chaotic and brutally honest film that somehow became one of the most important British films ever made. And he's right, Trainspotting does upset people, because that was always the point. Boyle didn't want to just show the life of a junkie, he wanted to show what heroin feels like. Not just the drug, but the consequence of it all, the effect on family, life, friends, relationships, and yourself. Trainspotting is the film where social realism collides with surrealism, where everyday life bleeds into nightmares. Comedy and horror exist in the same frame. And this isn't just because Boyle wanted to be stylish, but because addiction itself is chaotic, contradictory, and impossible to pin to just a single genre. Trainspotting isn't a film about drugs, it's a film that takes you into the world of drugs and leaves you hung out to dry. Trainspotting doesn't begin in horror. It begins in motion, fast cuts, loud music, characters who feel alive in a way that's instantly magnetic. Before the consequences arrive, the film gives you energy, it gives you humour, it gives you momentum, and that's not accidental.
And you feed off that. We all feed off that pain and joy sometimes.
He's talking about voyeurism here, and how we're drawn to other people's pain and joy. How cinema lets us peer into the lives we don't live. And Trainspotting understands that impulse perfectly, because it doesn't shame the audience for looking, it invites you in. Because heroin, at least at first, is seductive. The film uses social realism as its foundation, the council estates, the unemployment, the boredom. But instead of just sitting in that bleakness, the film immediately pushes against it. It injects energy where there shouldn't be any, style where there should be stillness. Surrealism enters not as fantasy, but as relief. When Renton dives into the worst toilet in Scotland, the moment is grotesque, absurd, almost cartoonish. Yet it's filmed like a historic quest. When he sinks into the carpet, the world literally swallowing him whole. It's exaggerated to the point of unreality, but emotionally, it makes perfect sense. This is what escape feels like. The camera doesn't judge these moments, the editing doesn't slow them down, the music doesn't warn you. Instead, everything conspires to make the experience feel light, funny, even exhilarating. Comedy and disgust exist in the same frame. Horror is undercut by humour. Reality is bent just enough to become bearable. This is the high. And it's important that it feels good, because Trainspotting understands something essential. If the film only showed addiction as miserable, it would be dishonest. Heroin isn't just destruction, it's temptation. It's the promise of warmth, of stillness, of escape from a world that feels suffocating.
When you're on junk, you've only one worry, scoring. And when you're off it, you're suddenly obliged to worry about all sorts of other shite.
The genre itself becomes unstable. The world doesn't feel consistent because addiction isn't consistent. Trainspotting doesn't show you why people take drugs through dialogue or explanation. It shows you by making sobriety look unbearable and intoxication look like freedom, at least for a while. But the high never lasts. And slowly, the escape begins to warp. As Trainspotting goes on, the surreal moments stop feeling like interruptions. They become the language of the film. Reality stretches, time slips, spaces feel wrong. What once felt playful begins to feel unsettling, and the genre keeps shifting to match that change. This is where Trainspotting becomes more than just stylish. The surrealism isn't there to impress, it's there because the character's perception of the world is breaking down. The film doesn't show addiction from the outside, it traps you inside it. When Renton overdoses and sinks into the floor, the moment is quiet, almost peaceful. The camera pulls back, the sound dulls. It's not shot as panic, it's shot as release. That's terrifying because it feels calm. Later, the baby crawling across the ceiling isn't just a shock image, it's a moment when comedy collapses into horror. The film doesn't announce this shift, it just lets it happen. 1 second you're laughing, the next you're deeply uncomfortable. And that emotional whiplash is deliberate. Addiction doesn't move in straight lines, it doesn't stay in one genre. It slips between joy and terror without warning. So the film does the same. Boyle uses every tool available, editing, sound, colour, performance, to reflect an internal state rather than an objective reality. What we're seeing isn't what happened, but it's how it felt. That's why Trainspotting can sit in contradiction. It can be funny and horrifying in the same breath. It can be intimate and alienating all at once. The genre refuses to settle because the characters refuse to be stable. Even moments of connection feel artificial. Friendships blur into dependency. Loyalty exists alongside betrayal. The further the film leans into this distorted reality, the harder it becomes to tell where the escape ends and the damage begins. Because the escape isn't freedom anymore. Reality hasn't disappeared, it's just been bent out of shape. And when the film finally lets that reality snap back into place, it doesn't feel like clarity, it feels like a loss. Almost imperceptibly, the world begins to harden. The colours flatten, the edits slow. The music that once carried momentum now feels distant or cruelly ironic. This is where reality reasserts itself. Withdrawal is shot like horror, not stylized horror, not exaggerated fantasy, but something claustrophobic and raw. The camera shakes, the cuts are frantic. Renton's body becomes the site of violence. There's no relief here, no humour to soften the blow. The surrealism that once offered escape now traps him in its own skin. And then there's Tommy. Tommy's death is one of the most important moments in the film because it is completely unromantic. There are no genre tricks left to hide behind, no surreal exaggeration, no comic release, just the brutal finality of consequence. This is what happens when the high runs out. Around him the world grows colder. Begbie's violence, once played for shock or dark comedy, loses its exaggeration. He becomes terrifying, not because he's larger than life, but because he isn't. He's real. And unlike the drug-induced surrealism, there's no escape from him. At this point, Trainspotting begins to shed its genre layers. The dreamlike quality that defined the earlier sections starts to disappear. The film no longer feels unsteady because the characters are no longer drifting, they're crashing. And then Renton leaves Edinburgh. When the film moves to London, something subtle but important happens. The chaos fades, the surrealism almost completely vanishes. London is cleaner, quieter, more controlled, and emptier. Edinburgh was unstable, unpredictable, overflowing with sensation. London feels flat, muted, sober. The genre collapses into something closer to plain realism, not because life has improved, but because the high is gone. This isn't a fresh start, it's a come down. The absence of chaos doesn't feel like peace, it feels like numbness. The film becomes still, not because things are better, but because the illusion has been stripped away. By the time we reach the final act, Trainspotting no longer needs surrealism. Reality is enough. The chaos is gone. The hallucinations are gone. The stylistic excess that once defined the film has drained away. But what remains is something deceptively simple. Renton's final choose life monologue is often misunderstood as hopeful, but listen to it closely. It's rehearsed, flat, almost lifeless. He doesn't sound liberated, he sounds programmed. He talks about choosing mortgages, washing machines, 9-to-5 routines, not with excitement, but with resignation. This isn't freedom, it's stability replacing chaos, order replacing sensation, and the film makes sure that we feel that shift. There's no stylistic flourish in these final moments, no surreal imagery, no genre blending. The world is finally grounded, and it feels hollow. And that's the final trick that Trainspotting pulls. It shows us that addiction doesn't end with clarity or redemption. It ends with substitution. One structure replaces another. One illusion gives way to the next. Renton hasn't escaped the cycle. He's just chosen a version of life that feels socially acceptable. And maybe that's the most uncomfortable idea the film leaves us with. That the opposite of addiction isn't happiness, it's numbness. Trainspotting uses genre the way drugs use perception, to reshape reality until it feels unrecognizable. And when that distortion finally fades, what's left isn't peace, it's emptiness. The film doesn't ask us to judge its characters, it asks us to feel what they felt. And that's why it still upsets people, because it doesn't offer comfort, it offers truth. Trainspotting isn't remembered because it shocked people, it's remembered because it understood something uncomfortable. That addiction isn't a straight line, it's chaos, contradiction, escape, and emptiness, often all at once. And by refusing to stay in one genre, the film refuses to simplify that experience. It doesn't tell you what heroin does, it shows you what heroin feels like.